Picture this. It's the middle of the night, somewhere around 2000 BC, and a man is locked in the most intense wrestling match of his life. But here's the twist that'll make your jaw drop. His opponent isn't another man, it's God himself. And by dawn, this wrestling match will literally change the course of human history. I'm talking about Jacob's wrestling match at the Jabbok River, and if you think you know this story, I promise you're about to discover layers you never imagined. This isn't just some weird Bible story about a guy who got into a tussle with the divine. This is the night that a chronic deceiver became Israel, the father of God's chosen people. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive deep into one of the most mysterious and life-changing encounters in all of Scripture. Let me set the scene for you, because context is everything here. Jacob is absolutely terrified. And I mean, sweating bullets, can't sleep, stomach churning terrified. You see, 20 years ago, Jacob had to flee for his life after stealing his brother Esau's birthright and blessing through some pretty elaborate deception. We're talking fake goatskin gloves to trick his blind father Isaac into thinking Jacob was his hairy brother Esau. Yeah, it was that kind of family drama. So Jacob ran away to his uncle Laban's house, where he spent 2 decades getting a taste of his own medicine. Laban tricked him into marrying the wrong sister, cheated him out of wages, and basically made Jacob's life miserable. But now, Jacob is heading home with his wives, children, and massive flocks. He's wealthy, he's successful, but there's one enormous problem. Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. 400! In ancient times, you didn't travel with an army unless you meant business, and Jacob is convinced that business is revenge. Jacob's mind is probably racing with worst-case scenarios. Will Esau kill him? Will he slaughter Jacob's family? Will everything Jacob has worked for be destroyed because of choices he made decades ago? So Jacob does what any terrified person would do. He tries to manage the situation. He divides his family and possessions into 2 groups, thinking maybe if Esau attacks one group, the other might escape. He sends ahead massive gifts, hundreds of goats, sheep, camels, cattle, and donkeys. He's basically trying to buy his brother's forgiveness. But here's what's beautiful about this moment. Jacob also prays. And not just any prayer, but one of the most honest, desperate prayers in the entire Bible. He says, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper.' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become 2 camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children." Do you hear the raw honesty there? Jacob isn't putting on airs or trying to impress God. He's saying, "I'm unworthy, I'm afraid, and I need help." That night, after sending his family across the Jabbok River, a tributary of the Jordan, Jacob stays behind alone. Now this detail matters more than you might think. The name Jabbok sounds like the Hebrew word for wrestling. It's like the author is giving us a hint about what's coming. Jacob is alone with his thoughts, his fears, his regrets. Have you ever had one of those nights where you can't sleep because your mind won't stop racing? That's Jacob right now. But then, in the darkness, someone approaches. Genesis 32 simply says, "A man wrestled with him till daybreak." But this isn't just any man. As the story unfolds, we realize this is a theophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of God himself. Some scholars believe it was the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, before his earthly birth. Now, I want you to imagine this scene. It's not a gentle spiritual encounter. This is physical, exhausting all-night wrestling. We're talking about 2 figures locked in combat, muscles straining, sweat pouring, neither giving up. For hours and hours they grapple in the darkness. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. Jacob is holding his own against God. Think about that for a second. The same God who spoke the universe into existence, who parted the Red Sea, who rained fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. That God is wrestling with Jacob and not immediately overpowering him. Why? Because God is choosing to limit his power. He wants to engage with Jacob on a level where Jacob can actually participate. As dawn approaches, we read that the divine wrestler touches Jacob's hip socket and dislocates it. With a single touch. This shows that God could have ended the match at any moment, but he chose not to. He let it continue all night because Jacob needed this encounter. When the mysterious figure says, "Let me go, for it is daybreak," Jacob responds with words that show how much he's changed during this wrestling match. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." This is huge. Remember, Jacob's entire life up to this point has been about scheming and manipulating to get what he wants. He stole his brother's birthright. He deceived his father. He outmaneuvered his uncle Laban. But now, instead of trying to trick or manipulate, he's holding on in desperate dependence, asking for a blessing. The divine wrestler then asks, "What is your name?" Now, God obviously knows Jacob's name. This question is about something deeper. In Hebrew culture, names carried tremendous significance. They reflected character and destiny. Jacob means heel grabber or deceiver, and that's exactly what Jacob had been his entire life. When Jacob answers with his name, he's essentially confessing who he really is. He's acknowledging his identity as a deceiver, a manipulator, a schemer. But then comes the most beautiful part of the entire story. The divine figure says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Israel means he who wrestles with God, or God fights. This isn't just a name change. It's a complete identity transformation. Jacob the deceiver becomes Israel, the one who wrestles with God and prevails. But notice that word overcome or prevailed. Jacob didn't win through strength or cunning. He prevailed through persistence and desperate dependence. He won by refusing to let go, by recognizing his need for God's blessing. When Jacob asks for the name of his divine opponent, he doesn't get a direct answer. Instead, he receives a blessing. Jacob then names the place Peniel, which means face of God, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." As the sun rises, Jacob limps away from this encounter, limping because of his dislocated hip, but also limping as a completely transformed man. The limp becomes a permanent reminder of this life-changing night. It's a sign of both his weakness and his encounter with the divine. So what does this incredible story mean for us today? Because trust me, this isn't just an ancient wrestling match. It's a blueprint for how God works in our lives. First, notice that this encounter happened in Jacob's darkest moment. He was terrified, alone, facing the consequences of decades of poor choices. Sometimes God meets us not when we're on the mountaintop, but when we're in the valley, when we're desperate and have nowhere else to turn. The wrestling match represents the spiritual struggles we all face. We wrestle with our past, our fears, our inadequacies, our sense of unworthiness. But here's the beautiful truth. God doesn't avoid our struggles. He enters into them with us. He could easily overpower us, fix everything with a snap of his fingers, but instead he chooses to wrestle with us, to let us be real participants in our own transformation. Jacob's hip injury is also deeply significant. It's a reminder that genuine encounters with God often leave us changed in ways that are visible to others. The limp wasn't a punishment. It was a badge of honor, a sign that he had met with God and lived to tell about it. Sometimes the struggles that seem to weaken us actually become our greatest testimonies. And here's something that gives me chills every time I think about it. Jacob prevailed not through strength, but through refusing to let go. In our performance-driven culture, we think we need to be stronger, smarter, more put together to get God's attention. But Jacob teaches us that sometimes the greatest victory is simply holding on when everything in you wants to give up. The name change from Jacob to Israel is profound because it shows that God sees not just who we are, but who we can become. Jacob had been defined by his deception for decades, but God gave him a new identity based on this one night of wrestling. God doesn't define us by our worst moments. He defines us by our encounters with him. Think about the timing too. This transformation happened right before Jacob faced Esau. God prepared him for the reconciliation he'd been dreading by first reconciling Jacob to himself. When we're wrestling with difficult relationships or situations, sometimes God needs to change us first before he changes our circumstances. You know what I find most encouraging about Jacob's story? He didn't become perfect after this wrestling match. He still made mistakes, still had flaws, still struggled with trust issues. But he was forever changed because he had encountered God face to face. The man who once ran away from his problems now limped toward them, but he limped with the confidence of someone who had been blessed by God himself. His descendants would carry the name Israel, the people who wrestle with God. And isn't that exactly what faith is? Not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to wrestle with our doubts, our fears, and our circumstances while holding tight to God. Maybe you're in your own dark night right now. Maybe you're facing the consequences of past decisions, or wrestling with fears about the future, or feeling unworthy of God's love. Jacob's story reminds us that God doesn't wait for us to get our act together before he meets with us. He comes to us in our mess, in our midnight hour, and he's willing to wrestle with us all night long if that's what it takes. The question isn't whether you're strong enough or good enough. The question is, are you willing to hold on? Are you willing to say, like Jacob, I will not let you go unless you bless me? Because, friend, God loves to bless those who refuse to let go, even when they're limping, even when they're struggling, even when they feel like they don't deserve it. That's the kind of God we serve, one who doesn't just tolerate our wrestling, but actually honors it with his presence and his blessing. If this deep dive into Jacob's incredible night resonated with you, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe for more biblical deep dives that'll help you see these ancient stories in a whole new light.